25, the economy grew at an annualized rate by 2.6%. We have economists saying that today's numbers are so nominal they could be forecasted away and revised away. So aren't you jumping the gun a little bit, calling this a full-blown recession?
Right. So I know that there's a lot of excuses being made for Mark Carney today, and I'm not surprised. By the way, which outlet are you with?
The Hill Times. Is 2.6% economy growth an excuse, or is that just the numbers?
It's actually, there's no 2.6% economic growth. The economy, if I could, so you're having to go back? How many quarters are you having to go back now?
2 quarters.
So you're having to go back. Okay, so let's get this straight. There's been 4 quarters since Mark Carney became Prime Minister. The economy shrunk in 3 of those 4 quarters. Canada is the only G7 country for which that is the case. There's now been an entire year of Mark Carney that is recorded in economic data, and the GDP is smaller today than when he took office. That is only true of Canada among G7 countries. And now there are 2 back-to-back quarters where the economy shrunk, which is the literal definition of a recession. And by the way, it's not just that our economy is shrinking quarter after quarter.
All right, so a lot to unpack there, but I'm going to start with this contention from Pierre Poilievre, that that is the literal definition of a recession. This came up during the last bit of the Biden regime, where there was a period of 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, but the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, said no, it's not actually a recession. So a recession is defined as a prolonged period of economic contraction, and I'm actually going to side with the NBER here and say that it's absolutely possible to have 2 consecutive periods of negative GDP growth without having a recession. And the reason I say that is because GDP is not an exact measurement of economic growth. There is a reasonable amount of correlation. What GDP really measures is spending. So if the government, for example, were to buy $100 billion worth of cars and then drive them all out into the ocean, that would make for a increase in GDP, but that would not be good for the economy. That would be a massive waste of resources, and in a long-term sense for the economy, that would have a negative impact, as opposed to that $100 billion being left in the hands of the taxpayers to spend on whatever they wanted. And it's an example of the broken window fallacy to imagine that any sort of useless government spending like that is good for the economy. The broken window fallacy, which was first articulated by Frederick Bastiat, says, if you break a window, isn't that good for the economy, because the guy has to get the window replaced, and so that makes more business for the glacier, or the glass maker, whatever, and then he spends money, and so on and so forth. But in reality, if the guy, the merchant, didn't have to replace his window, he would have spent his money on something else. He might have bought a new suit, and then that guy would have spent, the tailor would have spent the income he made from that on something else, and so on and so forth. So depending on how GDP is constituted, so it really depends, because there's certain aspects of spending that are good for the economy, and others that aren't really. Like, for example, during the years of the Trudeau government, there was a substantial increase in public sector administration, basically the bureaucracy. And, and so that's sort of negative for the economy because they're not creating any new wealth, but they are getting paid in tax dollars. So you hire bureaucrats to sit around in Ottawa not really doing much, or worse, if they're actually going out and being harmful to businesses, to enterprise, as sometimes people in the regulatory regime can be, then that's going to increase GDP, but it's not actually going to benefit the economy. I guess the other factor here is that the recent contraction is only 0.1%. Previous contraction was 1%. So these aren't huge numbers here. So part of the reason why I think that the present GDP decline of 0.1%, it's not a big deal, is because one of the things that's been going on is the federal government has been reducing public administration. They've been cutting down on the bureaucracy, aiming to do so through attrition, just not replacing employees when they retire. So reductions in government spending, especially on public administration, yes, this is going to impact on GDP, but it's also going to make the economy healthier. Furthermore, government capital investment fell by 2.5%, mainly because of a decrease in investment in weapon systems. Yeah, this is a good thing, from my opinion. The less money the government's spending on weapons, the more money people have in their pockets, lower taxes. Ultimately, all government spending comes at the expense of taxpayers. So any reduction in government spending is going to mean more money for ordinary people. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that the economy is doing great or anything. I think that there's a lot of systemic issues which have not been dealt with. Government spending is way too high. Taxes are way too high. We've got an economy that is heavily dirigist. There's too much government intervention, too many subsidies, and too much regulation and red tape. I think the economy's really messed up, but I just don't think we're in a recession. Another really important issue facing the Canadian economy today is the unemployment rate. And this particular graph only goes until April of 2025, but it has not gotten better since then, or rather, it's still at 6.9%. So maybe things have leveled off a bit, but there's been no improvement, and you can see a really steady, dramatic increase over the last 2 years. And in my opinion, well, there's two main factors. First being the minimum wage, and it's pretty clear this is a big factor because if you look at youth unemployment rates or youth, 16 to 18, you see the younger you go, the greater the unemployment rate becomes, and it's because younger workers are a surrogate for low skilled workers in general because they don't have as many years of experience or as much training or or yeah, experience or training that would make them command a higher wage. So the other factor was the high levels of immigration because then you had these so-called students who are really just economic migrants that were paying a pretty high price in order to gain access to the Canadian labor market, who were then competing for the same entry-level jobs that were traditionally done by younger Canadians. And so there's sort of a confluence of events there, and it's a real problem for our youth. And then I think it also becomes a problem in terms of crime because if people aren't working jobs, I think that contributes to higher crime rates. You know, the idle hands are the devil's plaything, and if people are denied legitimate economic opportunities, then a lot of the time they're going to pursue illegitimate economic opportunities, uh, dealing drugs, um, robbery, what have you. But this is another important factor in terms of looking at how the economy is doing. Are we in a recession? Who is getting the benefits from economic economic growth in the economy in general? Uh, and this is a huge problem, especially for Canadian youth. It's very difficult. The job market is very difficult today, and with AI and all these other things that are happening in the world right now, it's only getting harder for people to find work.